You're listening to the Really Useful Podcast. This is the tech podcast for technophobes from makeuseof.com. My name is Christian Cawley. Welcome to the show. This is your weekly dose of tech tips and tricks for anyone who isn't all that familiar with technology. In this week's show, there is no tech news. We're going to go straight into the tips and tricks that are brought to you by myself, Christian Cawley, and my co-hosts, Ben Stegner and Gavin Phillips. We are going deep into the rabbit hole of Linux. Now you're probably thinking, and I guess just a little handy hint for Gavin, this kind of ties in a little with my other recommendation. 7 myths about Linux that you should stop believing. Now, I started using Linux kind of by accident, basically, because because I'm quite keen on the Raspberry Pi computer, and the majority of operating systems for the Raspberry Pi are Linux. I think it's like 99% of them are Linux, with I can only think of one exception at the moment, and that's RISC OS. So you probably think that Linux is for a very special group of people, such as developers and coders. That's not the case. I use Linux on a day-to-day basis. I have not developed anything for years, although my wife gave me a really good idea the other day. Another thing about Linux is you think that it's all about command line use, don't you? But it's not. It's a beautiful desktop. I'm using the Ubuntu 22.04 LTS operating system at the moment with the Nomad desktop. It's beautiful. It's fine. It's perfect. It's completely mouse driven. I occasionally use the command line, but not very often. Linux isn't suited for gaming. Wrong. We'll come back to that later. It's hard to find apps for Linux. There's a small number, and it is a shrinking number, of apps that you can't use on Linux comfortably, such as the Adobe Suite, Microsoft Office, and others. You can install Microsoft Office on Linux with an application layer software called Wine. You can probably do the same with Adobe applications, as far as I know, but then again, there are perfectly good alternatives. I do most of my work using LibreOffice. There's a whole suite, well, not a suite because they're all separate, but there's a whole selection of graphic and video editing and audio editing apps that are an alternative to the Adobe Suite. Linux can't be infected with viruses. Hurrah! Yes, it can. It's not. I mean, look, you've heard of websites going down and websites being attacked by viruses. The majority of websites out there run on servers that have Linux operating systems on them. So yes, that is a risk. Linux is only used on servers. Well, it's largely used on servers, as I've just explained. Linux is too fragmented. Now, you could say yes to this. It depends how you feel about the idea of there being lots of different Linux operating systems which have different configurations of software, and while they all rely on the same Linux kernel of drivers and high-level software, at the same time, it does give you the opportunity to find an operating system that really feels like you can just get on with. Whereas with Windows and Mac OS, it's Windows and Mac OS. That's all you get. And with Linux, there's a whole family that you can choose from to find the one that suits you the best. That works for a lot of people. It may not work for you, but it does work for a lot of people. Yeah, there are a lot of myths around Linux, but it isn't as the only thing I can code is web pages and CSS, and there's no coding done by me. I just use Linux, and it works perfectly well for me. So
I think quite a few of those things are becoming more and more debunked as we go on as well, aren't they? Things like the gaming on Linux. It's easier than ever to do that now, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. You won't believe how easy it is, actually.
Yeah, I think as well, one of the things that did put me off using it for quite a long time actually was your second point, which was you have to master the command line to use Linux. And for a long time, the thought of having to learn an entire new sort of programming or control language for a whole new operating system was a bit like, oh my god, that's overwhelming. When you see like Linux professionals say going, you just enter this in the terminal, and it does this, and you go, wow, that's fantastic. But the reality of it is that all of the best Linux distributions come with really, really good graphic user interfaces these days. And some of them are really customizable as well. So you can take it wherever you want to go if that's what you want to do.
I would say I probably know the Linux command line better than I ever knew MS-DOS. And that's just through occasional dipping in, really. So I guess you pick it up as you go along if you want to. But, I mean, there's plenty of people who didn't want to go anywhere near MS-DOS back in the day, and as soon as there's the opportunity to load Windows 3.1 or whatever, then they took it. So
yes,
it's it all balances out. But it is definitely not as complicated as you've been led to believe. Regular listeners will know I recently got a new phone. It's a Nokia XR20, which was reviewed on MakeUseOf. And, we all think we know about phones and, how to use phones, issues surrounding phones. But it turns out a lot of the things that we think we know are actually myths, aren't they, Ben?
Yeah, there are plenty that I think myths are interesting because some used to be true but aren't anymore because technology's evolved. You have some that there's some a kernel of truth, but it's been taken too far. And then there's some that are just like urban legends that are, scribbled on the bathroom stall or the underpass or the bridge. And it's just, they never go away because it's just like a popular misconception.
I really like the featured image with this article because in the middle, there's a HTC with that old, I used to have a HTC, forgotten which model it was now. And it had a really useful news tool, which was miles better than the Google News offering at the time. Anyway,
I was going to say looking at these images is like a blast from the past because there's a Windows phone in there and there's like an iPhone 6. That is funny to see like that era of phones. My first smartphone was an HTC, but it was an older model than that. It still had physical buttons. Actually, it had touch buttons. Like they were, how do I phrase this? The buttons were like built into the device. Right. So like the 4 symbols were like on the device, but it wasn't like you press the button and it was still like a touch sensitive spot.
Windows Mobile?
No, it was an HTC Evo 3D. It was on Sprint, and it had 2 cameras on the back that could take 3D pictures and videos, which was super gimmicky, but pretty cool idea for the time. That was back when 3D was still in its fad.
Yeah, my wife had a LG phone that could play 3D, and it was a real battery eater. But the other thing about this LG phone, which came in useful for helping our readers, was that it had a HDMI port, of all things.
Oh, like a mini HDMI?
Yeah.
Or a full size?
It wasn't full size. It was mini or micro. I can't remember which. Anyhow, back to the point. Popular smartphone myths that aren't true. Number 1, apps running in the background should be closed to save battery and avoid slowdowns. There's loads of things that you should do with your phone before you consider even doing that. And in most cases, it's not required because Android and iPhone, or iOS I should say, will do that automatically for you anyway. So...
yeah, this one drives me crazy. I don't want to go too much into it, but I think we talked about this before. I see people do this all the time, and it always drives me crazy because people like constantly swipe away all the apps on their phone and the switcher every time before they lock their phone. And I say, this is like if you closed your browser every time you wanted to go to a new website. Like the apps in that list are there for you to be able to easily switch between and jump between, not that you have to force them closed all the time. So that, it drives me crazy. I used to, in the early days of Android, I used a task killer when I didn't know any better, but I haven't done it in a long time.
Number 2, you should let your battery drain completely before recharging. Now, don't do that. Lithium-ion batteries perform better when they remain charged. Some older types of batteries lasted longer when you fully drain them before recharging to 100%, but you really don't need that. They don't have this cell memory like the older battery rechargeable batteries do. I mean, the thing about this is, it's kind of, in some cases, you're going to have your battery run out, and that's totally fine, but it's also totally fine if you don't let it run down, and you do put it back on charge at night or whatever. The trickle charge is best for the battery, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's based about the cycles, which we talked about before. You know, your battery going from 100 to 50 and then being charged from 50 back up to 100 and then dropping back down to 50. That's one cycle in the same way that 100 to 0 is. I think that the current wisdom now is that like 80% is about the max you should charge your phone to. I want to say both Android and iOS now have a feature where like on an iPhone, if you have your alarm set for whatever time and your phone is plugged in overnight, it'll like know that you're going to be getting up around that time, so it won't like fully charge your phone to 100% until just before you're going to get up, because charging it over that 80% number is like the magic number to where it's not using as much of a cycle or something like that. I don't know how much wisdom there is to that, but there's a couple apps on Android that help you do that too.
Yeah. Bluetooth and Wi-Fi Direct kill your battery. I mean, there was a time when it was kind of battery intensive with very large files, but who transfers very large files wirelessly? I know people do. Let's not pretend that they don't. But these days, that's not an issue. Bluetooth and Wi-Fi Direct, you know, we've got better battery capacity. We've got smarter network capabilities with those technologies. It's not really a problem unless you're really doing something. I mean, maybe no, it's just not going to happen unless you try and download a server or something.
The only thing I can see that would clarify this is if you have like an Apple Watch or a smartwatch or similar connected to your phone with Bluetooth, and it's constantly downloading apps or sending things back and forth, then that might use more battery. But the simple act of having Bluetooth turned on and not doing anything is going to use almost no battery.
Do higher phone specs mean better performance, Ben?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. A lot of the time, especially with Android phones, because Apple doesn't really release specs much for iPhone, a lot of the time with Android phones, manufacturers will list, how much RAM the phone has and how many megapixels the camera is and things like that. A lot of that is just kind of marketing. Like they want to say that there's 12 cameras or they want to say that there's X megapixels, but if the phone doesn't focus clearly or it doesn't handle dark images well and when there's no light, that's not really great. So yeah, specs matter. Obviously a $500 phone is going to usually be better than a $100 phone, but it's not everything. And a phone can be really great because the software is well optimized without having insanely high specs.
The only charger you should be using is the one that came with your phone. Oh no. Yeah, I mean, there is some truth to this in that you could quite easily end up going to a local store, thrift store, whatever, and buying a really terrible quality charge cable that doesn't do the job very well or breaks very quickly. And the ones that ship with your device are usually better quality. Then again, we're talking about a device that's getting charged every day, potentially, sometimes more than that. And if you're going to be plugging it in regularly, it stands to reason you should be using a decent cable. So stay away from the very cheap ones. You don't have to rely on the one that shipped with it, but if you're going to buy a replacement, buy something that's quality.
Yeah, you're right. There's definitely a happy medium. If you have an iPhone, you don't have to buy an expensive cable from Apple, but you shouldn't that's something I would never buy at like a dollar store, like you said, because they're just so junky. Unless it's an absolute emergency, you're on a road trip and you forgot your cable or something. But there's a lot of good brands like Anchor that sell like 3-packs, so you can, or 5-packs, and you can just kind of scatter them around your house, and then you have a high quality charger to use everywhere. But you definitely don't have to stick with the best one.
We've got some nice cotton-bound, fabric-bound cables, which tend to be hardier than the plastic ones.
Yeah, I have some braided cables too, and I agree.
That's
you
what
can
I'm looking for. Yeah,
throw them. It's not the right word, but you can kind of throw them around more, and they're not like that brittle plastic that breaks right on the connector part.
Absolutely. Now then, do I need to apologize to my phone, Ben, because it says here that charging your phone overnight kills the battery?
I don't know if you need to apologize. Maybe in an email like we learned about a few weeks ago. Yeah, that's another one that's not really true. It's kind of like it was another one I would file under like it was true at one point, but isn't really the case now. Older batteries didn't quite know when they were full, so they would kind of overcharge or they would like drop and recharge. I would say if you have to make a choice, probably better to not charge it overnight because of what we talked about before with the 80% and all that, but it's not going to hurt it to do that. Most of them know how to like drop and then trickle charge back up. So it's not like you're heating it up because it's on 100% all night.
Number 7, apps downloaded from Google Play or Apple App Store are completely safe. This is, of course, nonsense, as we've found in numerous occasions recently. There are bad people developing apps that appear to be innocent, and these apps are getting permissions on phones to then collect data about how you use your phone and personal details as well. This has happened repeatedly, particularly it's happened with Apple, but it's happened repeatedly on Google Play. Basically, anywhere you get an APK installation file for Android has a level of risk to it. So on both platforms, stick with trusted developers with good reputations and a good set of reviews. And if it's a new app, wait until you've seen some good reviews.
And don't download stuff that's a lot of, when you see these lists of like Google just removed 25 apps from the Play Store that are malware, it's all like shady wallpaper apps and like just junk, like scammy looking solitaire. Like, there's better versions of pretty much all this stuff. So if it looks like a scammy one that barely anybody uses, it probably is a problem.
Ben, I am an evil perpetrator on CSI or NCIS or a movie, or I've been wrongly accused and someone is chasing me. I've decided to turn off my phone, remove the SIM card, and put it in airplane mode. Can I be tracked?
Yes, you can, because that's not 100%. There's a lot of radios in your phone that airplane mode or turning it off don't turn off. So airplane mode, I think we discussed this before. Airplane mode basically turns off all the wireless radios in your phone. So Wi-Fi turns off, your cellular connection turns off, usually Bluetooth turns off, but you can actually have Wi-Fi and or Bluetooth turned on in airplane mode. And some phones now, like if you are using Bluetooth and you turn Wi-Fi off, it keeps Bluetooth turned on so you don't disconnect your headphones or whatever. GPS is the big one that's not affected by airplane mode on pretty much any phone. So GPS isn't a wireless radio. So having that still turned on means your phone could be tracked. Your SIM also, there's identifiers in your phone that don't require your SIM card, and also there are features like Apple's Find My iPhone network, or Find My network now I guess it is, can detect where your phone is based on it coming into contact with other Apple devices, which is something they introduced when the AirTag came out. Now those other people don't know that they're walking by Ben Stegner's phone or whatever, but they know that it'll update the location with Apple. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that your phone can be tracked, even if you think it's turned off and hidden.
Yeah, you could remove the battery and you could ditch the phone, or you could stick it in a lead block or a Faraday cage, just for all you screenwriters
Spies
out there. Yeah, and genuine spies maybe. Yeah, automatic brightness settings save battery. That isn't true. The idea is that using the onboard light sensor of a smartphone can automatically calibrate the ideal brightness setting to save power, but in fact, it might save you a tiny bit of battery by dimming your screen when appropriate, but the light sensor uses more power over the day by constantly pinging the CPU to process the data it collects and decides if a lower or higher brightness setting is appropriate. I didn't know that one. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think about that. That's probably something. I wouldn't say this is like a massive battery concern. I would say that's best to just use whatever you value more between convenience and eking out every last bit of your battery. If you're constantly changing locations during the day and it's sunny outside and then you're inside and all that, and you don't want to have to worry about opening the quick menu on your phone and changing the brightness, I don't think you're going to be like draining massive amounts of battery to have auto brightness. But like anything else, anything that takes power on your phone is going to require the battery. And really, it would probably... The screen is one of the biggest drainers on your phone. So
Yeah.
it takes more battery to have your phone at a super high brightness all day than it does for it to check every once in a while and adjust. So
Yeah.
whether you do it through automatic brightness or manual, lower your brightness if you're looking to save battery is the takeaway there.
Yeah. And this one's, I had to mute to have a little bit of a chuckle whilst I was reading this next one there. The open source nature of Android makes it more prone to vulnerabilities. Now, this is quite an interesting myth because most people don't know that Android is open source. And, that doesn't necessarily make it more prone to vulnerabilities. Any operating system, any software can be prone to vulnerabilities. And Android is remarkably secure. In fact, I think Android is derived from Linux, and I'm guessing, it is, aside from web servers, it is the widest, in fact, it's probably more widely used than web servers. So it's probably the most secure version of Linux. And I guess that makes it the most secure operating system on the planet, really.
Yeah, well, Android's more popular than Windows, I think, just based on raw. But that includes like Android being installed on like smart
Phones,
like
tablets,
smart
smart
boxes
TVs.
and stuff.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
just phones, but yeah,
No.
but I guess you're right, because probably I would say the reason for that is that Android has more built-in protection out of the box than even like Linux. Because I'm not that there's a ton of Linux malware, but I mean you could in theory install Linux, open up your browser, and download some malware like that. Whereas on Android, there's a few steps in place to prevent you from doing that.
Yeah.
So I guess the key with this myth is that open source doesn't mean insecure. It's the fact that Android lets you install apps from anywhere, whereas iOS doesn't. Another really big key factor too is that iPhone apps are sandboxed, which means that even if you had a malicious app, like it can't. If you don't give it permission to access your contacts, for example, like an app just can't randomly decide to read data from another app, whereas that's a little bit less restricted on Android. Which is another factor too. So as usual, it all comes down to what you download and where you get it from.
Your computer, and indeed pretty much any other electrical device that you're using, say from your oven, I suppose. Oven probably has some as well, actually. Pretty much all electrical devices have RAM. Well, there's a lot of things about RAM that you think you might know that aren't necessarily true. Now, this is really a PC-based guide to do with random access memory. That's your RAM. That is a basic component of a computer or a smartphone, and it is where information is stored by your processor so that your processor can get on to do with other tasks, usually related, but not always, and then bring the information back. But actual physical RAM devices, there's a bit of confusion about what you can and can't do with them, isn't there, in PCs?
Yeah, absolutely. You hear an awful lot of stuff surrounding RAM that's sometimes true, sometimes isn't, and it's because of the nature of what it is. It's a computer hardware component, so it's easy to get quite muddled. Even I still get a little bit confused from time to time, when trying to like install some new RAM or trying to buy some online. If you've not done it for a while and the standards have changed, you get a bit out of sync with what's going on. So it can't be helped, I think.
So there's various things here, such as you can't mix RAM sizes or brands. Is that true?
No, you can mix them if you want, and you can mix RAM brands if you want. But there's more a yes with a but. So if you don't match your RAM, and that could be the speed or the size of the RAM, and even actually sometimes down to the serial number, which I found out the wrong way, which was deeply irritating. But moving on from that, if you do match them together, you are likely to get a much better overall level of performance than if you mix and match brands and speeds and whatever. So yes, you can do it. No, you probably shouldn't.
Okay. I don't need more RAM, or my system has enough RAM.
Again, if your system is running out of RAM, then no, you don't have enough RAM. But the thing is, if you go to your local computer shop and the computer salesman says, here's a computer with say 8 gigabytes of RAM and it's a Windows 11 machine or what have you, you are these days highly likely to probably start running out of RAM. That's just the way that computers are now. They're not as technically as efficient as they were in the very old days. We have more access to RAM, so computers and developers tend to just be a bit more liberal with how much RAM they want to use. And as such, if you think you don't have enough RAM, or your system has enough RAM already, it could be worth considering your system specs, looking at the programs that you're using, especially if you run into that age-old problem of my computer doesn't feel fast. And that's often one of the reasons behind it, because you don't have enough RAM to hold all the programs that you have open and want to use concurrently.
So is RAM size all that matters?
Oh, now this is a really interesting one. So RAM size, excuse me, RAM size, we're not talking about definitely the actual size in terms of memory. So between 8 gigabytes and 16 gigabytes of RAM, you will probably see a significant increase in speed, because the amount of capacity your computer has to hold information from different programs together dramatically increases. Paired with the size of RAM is the speed of RAM. So you can buy faster RAM as well. And that's maybe a talk for another day without getting really into the nuts and bolts of how RAM works. But generally, if you have more RAM, you can expect a faster experience.
Okay. And there's this idea that if you clear your RAM, you can boost the speed of your device.
Oh, okay. So this is one that's like a big myth, and it's a big no-no. You want your system RAM on your computer to be, I won't say full to the brim, because then you are going to start running into the issue that we discussed a moment ago, which is where you don't have enough RAM. But you do want the RAM on your system to be holding information pertinent to the programs that you're going to be using. So if you spend all of your time clearing the RAM, as they say, you're just removing information relevant to the programs that you are using. And your computer will just go, oh, it's empty, I better fill it up again. So you're not saving any time to do anything else. You're just making your computer refill it and refill it and refill it, which can end up slowing things down considerably. The other thing as well I would add to that is that a lot of the programs that say we will clean your RAM and we will boost your RAM are snake oil at best and could actually be malware at worst. So really, really steer clear of those.
You must use an equal number of RAM sticks.
Okay, so this is similar to the first one. This is no, you don't, but probably yes, you should. Because the way that RAM works, most RAM that we have these days works in what's called a dual channel mode, which means that it works most effectively when there's two of them. So that's why you tend to buy RAM in a pair of sticks. Say you had 8 gigabytes of RAM, you would have two 4 gigabyte modules. You'd put them in the first and the third, or the second and the fourth lane, depending on your configuration on your motherboard, and they will work very happily together. Now, you absolutely could throw another stick of RAM in there. It would work completely fine, but your existing RAM would default to the lowest speed of the 3 modules installed. So if you installed another module that ran at a lower speed than the other two, all 3 sticks of RAM would run at the lowest speed. So it's another one that's, yeah, you can, and you will get the benefit of the larger capacity, but it may run slower than you were expecting. So it's a bit of a seeing what works for you.
Okay, and finally, this is a strange myth. You cannot upgrade the RAM on a laptop.
Ah, yeah. So this is another interesting one, though, isn't it? Because although on most laptops you can flip them over, take the back off, and you can get into the nuts and bolts of it, you can upgrade the RAM on the laptop. But most people think, or maybe you can't, because it's like an integrated thing, isn't it? And laptops seem a little bit more technical and a little bit more scary than a computer in some ways. The only issue is that some computers, particularly sort of lower budget and Chromebooks, for instance, may come with soldered RAM, and that's RAM that's literally soldered to the motherboard, and there's nothing you can do about that. I mean, there probably is if you're really technically minded, but for the most part, and for most people, definitely myself, well included in that, I'm not getting involved with trying to desolder RAM from a motherboard.
That's a fair point. Okay, we'll move on. As you may have guessed, we're on a bit of a summer break on the Really Useful podcast, which is why we're using unheard material from my colleagues Ben and Gavin now rather than sharing it at the time. And that's why there's no news in this episode. But that doesn't mean that you don't need to subscribe to the show if you don't already. It doesn't mean that you don't need to share anything that you've heard that your friends and family may find beneficial, or even follow us on Twitter or any other social network. And it doesn't mean that if you are so inclined, you don't get out of leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you do that last thing, let us know, and we may even read it out. Myself, Christian Corley, Ben Stegner, and Gavin Phillips will be back for more really useful podcasts soon. Until then, all the best to you, and we'll see you next time.